Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be making hanging basket brackets. This is a commission I have to do, so I have to make 4 of them. I'm going to start off with 4 pieces of 40 by 10. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to forge the hook on here. I'm going to do a square corner here. I'm going to taper this out and give it a nice little bit of detail. So first things first is the center punch marks, and I'll do that right on the edges. So when I center punch down here, it's going to swell them out slightly. So when I bring them out of the fire at a high heat, I'm not looking for where the center punches are. I can visibly see it without having to go looking for it or waiting for the steel to cool down. So this process here then is called upsetting. And what you're doing is you're upsetting material back into itself to make it bigger than the starting material. And you can do that for a lot of reasons, but this is because I want to bend it into a square corner and then have enough material to work it back and make it smaller again. So if I start off by doing it without upsetting it, you have a higher chance of making your material too thin on the corner and it doesn't look well. Right, and if you look closely enough here, you'll see that the material is after widening up there. So when I bend that down, I can work it back to 10mm. Right, so what I'm doing now is a controlled heat. So I'll heat up all around the center punch mark. I'll quench the area around it, and so I'm left with a thin strip, and then it'll only bend where it's hot, right on the corner. So I'm going to continue working this now at high heats, and I'm really focused on getting the outer part of the corner nice and crisp looking. So I'll just work in loads of various ways and work on that without trying to cause a cold shut. So a cold shut then is basically when 2 pieces of material overlap and it's not actually welded. It just looks like a kind of a slit. But what will happen at that over time is a crack will develop on it, and so you don't want that, so you have to be kind of careful of keeping it square. That's another reason to do an upset, because you can work the material back into 10mm and avoid a cold shut from forming. So, like everything, it's always heat, beat and repeat. I might actually get some t-shirts made on that. What do you think? Right, so there's the square corner. I'm happy enough with that, so I'll check now, is it square? And once I'm happy with that, then I can leave it down and repeat it another 3 times. Right, lovely jubbly. So I'm going to forge out the hooks on the end of each one now. And look, the physical work of blacksmithing is hard enough. So work smarter, not harder. Get yourself a hammer. So here now I'm just lining it up with the center punch marks. I'm just going to forge it straight, turn it over, kind of keep it even, and get it out to a nice long point. So the starting point there was 50mm of material, and you'd be surprised how much you could stretch that out to. So I was just forging it out now into a big long square taper, and I'm going to forge it into a little point, so I'll finish the point by hand. And I'll take the overall length of it then, because I'm going to repeat this on another 3 pieces, so I kind of want them all the exact same. The overall length of this when it was square was 190mm, and when I finished it round it was 210. Also, the beauty of a power hammer like this is you can hit really lightly when you need to, just to dress it. Wear the tool, not your body. Righty, so I'm going to forge a little decorative scroll on the top of the hook before I start forming the hook. It's easier to do it when it's straight like this. And once I'm happy with that now, I can get it up to heat again, and I'm going to do a controlled heat again. So I'll quench the area off and it'll only bend where it's hot. So my straight bar, or the arm coming out, won't bend on me and go all wonky. So I'll just hit that down like that then. So once I have that down now to near 90, I'm going to start forming the hook. Like that, you can see another controlled heat where I'll quench off the hook, or the little scroll I made. So I can actually hit that and it won't be damaged. So basically I'm going to keep going with this till I get the shape I want to get. I always like to have the hook slightly higher than the arm coming out as well. It's just a nice little aesthetic. Now that they're done and I'm happy enough with those, I'm going to do the bottom part of the upright that will be put onto the wall. So I'm going to taper this out slightly on both sides and give it a little tiny scroll on the end. And nice little bit of decoration, nice little aesthetic. And the reason I started with the square corner first was, if I had these two end sections formed, like the hook and this part, I wouldn't be able to hit those when I was forming the square corner or lay it down. I'd only damage them. So before I made this, I just kind of decided to myself that it might be the best way to do it, and I think it was. So what I done was I forged all these 4 sections out to the same length as well, and now I'm just going to form a little scroll on the end of it like this. Once I'm happy with this now, I can heat it up again, and I'm going to quench off the scroll and the section behind it will stay hot. So that will move and the scroll won't. So when I lay it down flat on the anvil like this, I can just flatten it out. And I think it's a nice little aesthetic and another option if you wanted to hang something off of it as well. So I'm happy with those 4 pieces now. I'm going to do a penny scroll. And then on this end, I'm going to do a split fishtail. So I'll just mark back the material 40mm, and so it's a 40mm square section. So I'll heat that up and I'll forge it back from the center punch marks over the edge of the anvil. So that leaves me a 40mm square, and it's nice and easy to turn into a round section. And if you really want to practice your hammer control, I don't think there's a better technique out there to practice. So if you're a beginner or you're at it a long time or whatever you're at, this is always a very good technique to do. So I'm not going to finish the taper of it. I'm going to give this a quarter twist, bring it back into the fire, and then forge the twist back out of it. So now I have what's going to be the penny on the scroll inside. Now I'm just going to forge that square section into a round section, and that's going to be the penny then for the penny scroll. Here now I'm just going to really refine that area and finish it off and move on to the next section. So here basically now I'm just dressing it and getting it into its final shape, so I'll just dress it nicely, get it nice and crisp. Right, so I'll bring this out of the fire at a bit of a welding heat, and when I turn the penny over, I can fire weld it slightly onto it, and I can dress the hard section of it so it's nice and flush from the round onto the scroll. And so I'll continue to scroll this up until I'm happy with it, and I'll move on then to the next section, which will be the split fishtail. And I think the split fishtail is probably one of my favourite scrolls to do. Basically you're tapering down the section but also widening it out at the end, similar to a fish's tail. And then you split it down with a chisel and then scroll it up on either side. It's a really kind of a gothic kind of a look to it, but very decorative as well. Once it's tapered out there on the width and spread out, I can come in with my hot cut chisel and I'll just chisel it down along. Basically with the first heat I'm kind of putting a deep engravement into it, so I can bring it out with the fire next then with a good heat and split it. So this process is kind of done in about 3, maybe 4 heats. It's no real problem to do once you get good at chisel work. It's also a very good one to practice as well, because you might say cutting it with an angle grinder is quicker, but with an angle grinder you can't get the same aesthetic as a hot cut chisel. And further on in this I will show you. To protect my chisel and my anvil, I put a piece of sheet down there, and so I can cut straight through and it'll only damage the sheet, which is grand to straight out of the scrap bin. As they say, you look after your tools and they'll look after you. Also, I don't normally like to wear gloves when I'm working, but if you're using something like a hot cut chisel or a punch, the heat goes straight up and it will absolutely scald your hands, so it's better to wear a glove for this kind of a thing. Here now I'm really taking note of how much I'm chiseling through, because I want to come back 130mm straight through cut and further 45mm back to kind of fade the chisel out of it, and that just gives it a really nice aesthetic as well. Also, the actual chisel cut itself is kind of like a tapered cut, because you're chiseling through from one side, and that also gives a nice aesthetic. It'd be nice to actually do 2 kind of cuts, one with a grinder to show you and one with a chisel cut, show you the real difference of an aesthetic. And it's these little details that really sets forge work apart from any other metal craft, because really it is all about the little details. So once I'm happy with this now, I can just go ahead and start scrolling it up. I like to work both sides evenly, try and keep them the same moving on. Otherwise it's going to be much more difficult to do. So just do them together and it's much more productive. And when you're doing a split fishtail like this, keep the pieces apart. You don't want them kind of scrolling up together. And you can definitely use a gas torch for doing this. There's nothing wrong with it really. Just if you want to develop skill, it's better to do it all on the anvil, I think anyway. And speaking of doing all your work on the anvil, leg vise is a great tool, so don't knock it. I heat up both sides there and I can lock it in the leg vise, and I can give it a bit of a tweak and spread them out a bit further. And this gives a really nice aesthetic. It's almost like a ribbon flaring out, really nice and delicate looking. Once I'm relatively happy with that now, I can just go ahead and start scrolling it up just like a normal scroll. And you can see now where the chisel mark kind of fades out, it really adds to the scroll. It just gives it really nice definition. And if you're ever going to attempt this, always remember to scroll at the right side and don't have that chisel fading out on the inside. Otherwise it's kind of pointless. So for me, there's nothing worse than a scroll that has two lovely, delicate, finished ends and then has this big straight spot in the center. So for me, it's important to kind of keep a flow moving out throughout the scroll. So basically, I'm just going to work this section by section until I'm happy with the finished piece. And this will be my template basically then for the next 3 scrolls. And lovely jubbly, here we go. So if you need a tool, make a tool. I literally whipped this up in about 20 minutes. Definitely not the prettiest, but it gets the job done. So it's essentially a spring swage with a top and bottom tool. Traditionally, the bottom tool would have set on the square hole on the anvil, whilst the smith held the top tool and the striker hit it. And this type of a tool could also be used on a fly press, but since I use my power hammer a lot, I like to make a lot of spring swages. And they're quite nice to have around. And this tool I'll probably maybe use once. I might use it again, but not for a long time. So that turned out well, I'm happy enough with that. And it fits like a glove. Alright, so now I have all the pieces marked out. I have them numbered, and now I'll center punch them and drill them. So with the back ones here, I have to countersink them. So I drilled a 10mm hole and I countersunk it with a 13mm bit. And so when I hammer this down through it now, I'll fill up that hole and I can grind it flat. So when I hang this up on the wall, it'll be sit nice and flush. Also, that tool that the rivet is sitting into on top of the anvil is the same shape as the rivet head. So when I hammer down, it's going to keep its shape and not get all deformed on me. So thankfully all the measurements went through well and everything fits perfectly. I'm just going to close this rivet on top. Quite an awkward one to do, but still a nice process. I'm using a dodgy rivet header here. It's a very old tool, I must make a new one, but it was perfect for this job. And I don't have to countersink this one. This is on the very top of the bracket and it's still a nice little aesthetic. I think the joinery for this type of work is the aesthetic as well, you know. You don't have to overdo it, and sometimes less is more. And I think that's something similar with this bracket. And there's something very satisfying about the sound of a rivet cooling down, tightening onto the material, like little mini bells. And with that, here are the 4 hanging basket brackets finished and cleaned and ready for a bit of paint. And when they're done on hanging, they're certainly going to complement any baskets with flowers hanging from them. So until next time, thank you for watching, and we'll see you then.